Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into how fortunes, vast fortunes, have actually shaped societies across time.
And help us make sense of it all, we're going to be looking at,
We're going to be taking a look at men of wealth,
yeah.
the story of 12 significant fortunes
Hmm.
from the Renaissance to the present day.
It's such a cool book. Instead of giving you like a dry economic history, it uses these biographical essays of people who represent, significant fortunes. So you get these glimpses into different eras and how the systems work.
So each chapter focuses on an individual,
Right, exactly.
and they kind of represent like a different time,
Yeah.
different fortune. And we get to see how they did it and what impact that had. Let's start our journey
Okay.
at the dawn of capitalism
Right.
in 16th century Europe with Jacob Fugger.
Jacob Fugger. Now, this is a guy who was lending money to emperors and even the Pope.
That's a lot of power, right? How did he build that kind of wealth?
Well, a big part of his fortune was from the copper trade. He had this, incredible sense for opportunity and was a master
He
negotiator.
was also deeply religious, right?
Yes.
Which seems at odds with, like, pursuing this enormous wealth.
It does seem paradoxical, right? You see, at that time, the prevailing economic ethics, influenced by the church, frowned upon excessive profit. But Fugger kind of saw his wealth as, like, a sign of God's favor.
So how did he reconcile these two seemingly conflicting ideas?
Well, that's where Dr. Putinger enters the story.
Okay.
Fugger was a patron of Putinger, who was a scholar and advocate for, like, the emerging profit system.
Oh, interesting.
So Putinger essentially gave intellectual cover for Fugger's business practices, arguing that they were, in fact, in line with Christian principles.
So even back then, we see this tension
Mm.
between traditional views of wealth and this new drive for profit.
Oh, absolutely. And Fugger's activities, things like financing wars and even participating in the sale of indulgences, these are things that church profited from too,
Yeah.
which in a way helped pave the way for this transition from feudalism to this new system of capitalism.
So it's like he was almost instrumental in shifting economic thinking
Yeah.
by accident. But let's move on to our next figure, John Law, a Scottish financier
Oh, John Law.
who made waves in 18th century France.
This guy was a brilliant but kind of a reckless figure. He had a knack for these grand financial schemes.
I mean, his early life is pretty colorful: gambling, exile from England. It sounds like he was always pushing the limits. What did his system actually set out to achieve?
So Law was a believer in the power of paper money and credit to stimulate economic growth.
Okay.
His system, as it was called, involved establishing a bank and promoting this thing called the Company of the West,
Okay.
which had a monopoly on trade in the French Louisiana territory.
So it sounds like he was creating a system based on trust, or at least the promise of future wealth. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, a lot, as history shows. You see, Law's ideas initially did stimulate the French economy, but then there was all this rampant speculation. It led to this bubble.
Which is where things started to, unravel.
Exactly. You got soaring inflation, and eventually, public confidence evaporated, and the whole thing came crashing down, leaving, financial ruin in its wake.
The classic boom and bust cycle, fueled by over-optimism and probably a lack of regulation. From a financial innovator, let's go to a banking dynasty that became, synonymous with power and wealth.
The Rothschilds.
The Rothschilds, oh yeah,
Yeah.
masters of finance and intrigue. Their story, their rise from humble beginnings in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt to becoming the richest family in Europe is
Wow.
really captivating.
What set them apart? How did they manage to create this vast fortune? Well, one key to their success was their ability to capitalize on opportunities, especially during times of war. So Nathan Rothschild, who established the family's London branch, played a really key role in financing the British war effort against Napoleon.
So their wealth was tied to conflict and political upheaval.
In a way, yeah, they really understood. They understood the flow of money during wartime, how governments need to raise money fast, so they profited from the trade in government bonds and subsidies.
But it wasn't just war profiteering, right?
Mhm.
What else contributed to their lasting influence?
They had these communication networks that were just unparalleled at the time. They used couriers, pigeons, even, carrier ships to stay ahead of the curve.
Wow.
This gave them an edge in financial markets, allowed them to react to events before anyone else. They really were pioneers of international banking, and their influence on the modern financial system is still felt today.
From the world of global finance to a titan of American industry, Cornelius Vanderbilt. This guy was known for his ruthless business tactics, and he was driven to build a transportation empire.
Vanderbilt was a force of nature. I mean, he really embodied that spirit of 19th century America, that time of rapid industrialization and cutthroat competition.
He started in steamboats, right?
Yeah.
How did he transition to railroads, which became, his real legacy?
So his early ventures in steamboats, those were like a stepping stone. He really saw that railroads had this potential to, transform American transportation. Vanderbilt started consolidating all these smaller railroads and created the powerful New York Central system.
But the consolidation of power often leads to controversy, right?
Well, yeah, Vanderbilt's monopoly over the railroads gave him a lot of control over prices, and, it even influenced political decisions. So this raised some concerns about the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of just a few.
So we see this dark side of the American dream playing out, even in its early stages. Vanderbilt's ambition and ruthlessness helped build an empire, but it also shows us the need for regulation to protect the public interest. Now, we shift gears to a woman who amassed a fortune in a very different way.
Okay.
Hetty Green, the Witch of Wall Street.
Hetty Green, that's an intriguing character. She defied social expectations both as a woman in finance and as someone who accumulated this immense wealth but lived incredibly frugally.
I mean, her eccentricities were legendary. All those tales of her cheapness and her refusal to spend money even on basic comforts. It seems almost counterintuitive for someone with so much wealth.
It does. It makes her stand out. But beneath the eccentric exterior, Hetty Green was a brilliant investor.
So her frugality wasn't just a quirk, it was a strategy.
She was a master of value investing. Green built her fortune through all these savvy investments in real estate, bonds, and even the call money market, where she would lend money to brokers on a short-term basis.
It's such a contrast to the lavish lifestyles of the Vanderbilts and the Rothschilds. Hetty Green shows us that there are so many different paths to wealth accumulation, and that sometimes frugality can be just as powerful a tool as ambition or ruthlessness.
Yeah, and remember, all these people were operating within specific systems that, they often help to shape through their actions.
But were these systems always accepted? I mean, were there those who pushed back against, the prevailing economic order?
Oh, absolutely. One such figure was Robert Owen, a Welsh social reformer and industrialist who challenged the exploitative practices of the early Industrial Revolution. He believed there was a more humane way to do business.
So instead of just accepting the status quo, he actively sought to create, a better system. That's pretty impressive for someone living in the midst of the Industrial Revolution.
Owen wasn't just a theorist. He actually owned and managed a cotton mill in New Lanark, Scotland, and that's where he implemented all these groundbreaking labor practices.
What kind of practices are we talking about? What made his approach so radical?
Well, he improved working conditions, provided education for the workers and their children, and even offered, affordable housing. He truly believed that investing in the well-being of his employees would benefit everyone.
That sounds like a precursor to modern ideas about corporate social responsibility. It's interesting to see those concepts emerging so early on.
Owen was ahead of his time, that's for sure. His experiment at New Lanark, it became a model for others who were looking for a more equitable and humane approach to industrial capitalism.
He was challenging the very foundation of the system, right? Like that idea that profit should come at any cost.
Exactly. Owen saw the dehumanizing effects of factory work firsthand, the poverty, the misery. He believed that a more just distribution of wealth wasn't just morally right, but, economically sound. He argued that a system that exploited workers would ultimately fail.
So he wasn't just some bleeding heart. He had a practical vision for how society should be. What was the lasting impact of his ideas?
Owen's writings, his lectures, they were very influential. He helped inspire the development of socialist thought and the rise of, trade unions that fought for better working conditions and fair wages. He even tried to establish these utopian communities, but those ultimately weren't successful.
It's remarkable how, even though those communities didn't take root, his ideas about social reform and the role of business in society, they still resonate today. It's like he planted the seed for a more ethical approach to capitalism.
His legacy is a powerful reminder that economic systems are human creations, and we have the power to shape them in ways that are more just and equitable. But now, from this visionary reformer, let's move on to a figure who really embodies that raw power of American finance, J. Pierpont Morgan.
J.P. Morgan was like the Zeus of Wall Street, a commanding figure who wielded such incredible influence. How did he build his empire?
Well, Morgan was a master of mergers and acquisitions and reorganizations. He consolidated control over, key industries like railroads, steel, and banking, and he amassed a fortune in the process.
He seemed to thrive on bringing order to chaos, wouldn't you say? Was he always driven by just profit, or did he see himself as serving a larger purpose?
Well, he certainly saw himself as a stabilizing force. In the often turbulent world of American finance, he played a crucial role in rescuing the U.S. Treasury during the Panic of 1907, for example.
So a financial superhero of sorts,
Yeah.
saving the day when others couldn't.
Yeah, he played that role more than once. But, his methods weren't without controversy. There were accusations of market manipulation and exploiting workers. So his immense wealth, it came at a cost for many.
It sounds like Morgan was a really complex figure, a man of great ambition and talent, but also someone whose actions, had some unintended consequences.
Right, and his story highlights those limits of power, even for someone as influential as Morgan. He faced increasing scrutiny from reformers and journalists and, even President Theodore Roosevelt himself. So that money trust investigation in 1912, that was a direct challenge to Morgan's dominance.
So even the most powerful figures are ultimately accountable to, the public and those systems they operate within. But let's turn our attention to a figure who operated in a much more shadowy realm, Basil Zaharoff, the mystery man of Europe, who built his fortune on arms dealing.
Zaharoff, yeah. That's a fascinating but disturbing character. He operated in this murky world of international arms trade, profiting from conflict and instability.
It's hard to imagine a more controversial way to accumulate wealth. What do we know about his methods?
He was a master manipulator, really skilled at playing governments against each other. Zaharoff really understood that conflict created a demand for weapons, and he was more than willing to fuel that demand for his own profit.
So he wasn't just a passive observer of, global events. He was actively shaping them to his advantage. How extensive was his influence?
His influence on governments and military procurement decisions was significant. He helped fuel the arms race in the lead up to World War I. That period marked by these heightened tensions and paranoia. His story really raises these uncomfortable questions about the role of private interests in international affairs and the ethics of profiting from war.
It's a chilling reminder that the pursuit of wealth can have these devastating consequences. From Fugger's copper empire to Zaharoff's arms deals, we've seen how this desire for wealth can shape economies, fuel conflicts, and leave a mark on history.
And remember, they weren't operating in a vacuum, right? They were products of their times, shaped by the systems they lived in, and in turn, shaping those systems through their own actions.
It's fascinating to see how these individual stories, spanning centuries and continents, all connect to these larger themes of power and ambition and the complex relationship between wealth and society.
What I find really striking is that sheer diversity of paths to wealth. I mean, we've seen industrialists, financiers, inventors, even, an arms dealer. But there are these common threads that run through their stories.
Like what? What are some of the commonalities you see?
So that relentless pursuit of profit, manipulation of systems, using power to achieve their ends, and often a disregard for the consequences of their actions. It's almost like there's this pattern, a cycle that keeps repeating throughout history.
A cycle of boom and bust, innovation and exploitation, the rise and fall of fortunes. It makes you wonder if we're destined to repeat these patterns.
That's the question, isn't it?
It makes you think about the systems that we operate within today. The stock market, the global economy, even just like the political landscape, they're all shaped by these same forces, right? It's like these echoes of the past are still influencing us now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Understanding how these systems were built, who benefited from their creation, that's crucial for navigating, all the complexities we face today.
So we've looked at the lives of these men of wealth, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. But what's the takeaway? What are we supposed to do with this knowledge? How can we avoid just, repeating the same mistakes?
That's the big question, isn't it? We can't just be passive observers of history. We need to actually engage with it, learn from it, and use that knowledge to shape, to try to shape a better future.
So it's not enough to just understand how they made their fortunes, how they influenced the world.
Yeah.
We actually need to think critically about, the systems they operated within and how those systems are still shaping our lives today.
Yeah, exactly. These stories should make us really question the distribution of wealth and power, even in our own time. What are the ethical implications of our economic choices, both individually and as a society?
So it's a call to action then. We can't just sit back and assume things will get better on their own. We have a responsibility to, engage with these issues and work towards a more just, equitable world.
Absolutely. What kind of world do we want to live in, right?
Huh.
One dominated by a handful of powerful individuals, or one where wealth is more equitably distributed and the pursuit of profit doesn't come at the cost of, human well-being.
Well, these men of wealth have shown us both the possibilities and the perils of wealth accumulation. I mean, they demonstrate the power of ambition, innovation, but they also highlight the dangers of unchecked greed and, those corrosive effects of inequality.
Their stories are such a powerful reminder that we're not just cogs in a machine. We have agency, we have choices, and
Right.
we can use those, use our voices and our knowledge to demand something better.
Hmm, that's inspiring. Even with these seemingly insurmountable challenges, we actually have the power to make a difference.
We might not be able to single-handedly change the world, but we can each contribute in our own way to a more just and sustainable future, right? It all starts with awareness, with education, with a willingness to, challenge the status quo.
It's been an amazing journey exploring the lives of these men of wealth and the systems they shaped. I've gained a whole new perspective on history and even just like the forces that shape the world today.
I hope this deep dive has sparked some reflection, maybe even a little inspiration for you.
It really has. It's a reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a living, breathing tapestry woven from the choices and actions of individuals,
Mhm.
and we're all a part of it.
So as we move forward, let's keep these lessons in mind. Let's keep exploring the forces that, shape our world.
Learn from the past, engage with the present, and work towards a future where wealth is uh, a force for good, not a source of division and exploitation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into men of wealth. I hope you found it as enlightening as I did. Until next time, keep exploring.